Ma'am, step out of the vehicle before this gets complicated. The flashlight beam cut across Naomi Brooks' face so suddenly she had to blink twice before she could even process the words. Rain tapped softly against the windshield of her aging silver Honda Accord while red and blue lights flickered across the wet pavement like broken pieces of glass. Naomi's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. Her hospital badge still hung from her neck, slightly twisted from the 14-hour shift she had just finished downtown at Mercy General. The digital clock on the dashboard read 11:47 p.m. She was less than 10 minutes from home. Less than 10 minutes from finally taking off her shoes, washing the smell of antiseptic from her skin, and collapsing into bed. Instead, two police cruisers sat behind her on the empty suburban road, engines humming low beneath the steady drizzle. Officer Ryan Keller stood beside her driver's side window, broad shoulders stiff beneath his rain-darkened uniform. Another officer lingered near the rear bumper, one hand resting near his belt, while his flashlight swept slowly across the interior of Naomi's car like he expected to find something hidden between the coffee cups and grocery bags. Naomi lowered the window carefully. Cold, rain-speckled air slipped inside immediately. "Officer, did I do something wrong?" she asked quietly. Keller didn't answer right away. His flashlight paused briefly on her face, then moved lower toward the passenger seat. "License and registration." Naomi nodded once and reached slowly toward her purse. "I'm getting my wallet." "Keep your hands where I can see them," Keller snapped quickly. The sharpness in his voice made her freeze for half a second before she carefully lifted both palms into view again. Her pulse quickened, but her expression stayed calm. She had learned a long time ago that calmness mattered. Especially now. Especially here. Water rolled down the side mirror beside her while a passing car slowed slightly before continuing through the intersection ahead. Naomi could feel eyes on her from both officers. Not casual attention. Suspicion. The kind that settled heavy in the air before anyone even explained why she had been stopped. "This your vehicle?" Keller finally asked. Naomi blinked once. "Yes, sir." "You sure about that?" Her stomach tightened slightly at the question. She glanced down at the steering wheel, then back at him. "It's registered under my name." Keller extended his hand impatiently. "Registration." Naomi handed over the papers carefully. Her fingertips felt cold despite the heat still blowing weakly through the vents. The second officer, Reeves, stepped closer now, his flashlight moving across the back seat where folded scrubs, a blanket, and a small stuffed giraffe sat beside a paper bag from a late-night diner. Reeves narrowed his eyes. "What hospital you work at?" "Mercy General." "That far downtown?" Naomi nodded. "Pediatrics." Reeves exchanged a quick glance with Keller. Something unreadable passed silently between them. Keller leaned down slightly toward the window again. "You fit the description of someone reported driving suspiciously in this area tonight." Naomi looked out toward the empty street lined with quiet brick homes and trimmed hedges glistening beneath the rain. "Suspiciously," she repeated softly. Keller ignored the question. "Where are you headed?" "Home." "Where's home?" Naomi hesitated for only a second before answering. "West Brookline." Keller studied her face carefully after she spoke, almost like the answer itself surprised him. Rainwater dripped from the edge of his flashlight onto the car door. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled low across the sky. Naomi swallowed slowly and rested both hands back on the steering wheel exactly where they could see them. Then another set of headlights appeared behind the cruisers, bright white beams cutting through the rain as a dark SUV rolled slowly toward the scene and came to a stop. The dark SUV stopped about 20 feet behind the second patrol car, its headlights glowing through the rain like two pale circles in the night. Naomi noticed it immediately in her side mirror, but neither officer seemed concerned at first. Keller kept studying her registration while Reeves slowly circled toward the back of the Honda again, his boots splashing through shallow puddles gathering along the curb. Naomi tried to steady her breathing. The warmth inside the car was fading fast each time cold wind slipped through the cracked window. She flexed her fingers once against the steering wheel to stop them from trembling. Her shoulders ached from lifting patients all day. Even her eyes burned from exhaustion. Earlier that evening, she had spent nearly 2 hours comforting a 6-year-old boy recovering from surgery because he was too scared to sleep unless someone stayed beside him. She still remembered the way he clutched the stuffed giraffe, now sitting quietly in her back seat. "You work pediatrics?" Reeves asked again, shining his flashlight toward the toy. Yes, Naomi answered softly. Reeves tilted his head slightly. Long shift. 14 hours. Keller finally looked up from the registration papers. Funny thing is, most people heading home after work do not drive around neighborhoods they do not belong in. Naomi felt something heavy settle in her chest at the words. She looked past Keller toward the rows of large homes lining the wet street. Every porch light glowed warm against the rain. I have driven this route home for 3 years, she replied carefully. Keller gave a faint shrug that felt colder than the rain itself. Does not mean we cannot ask questions. The SUV behind the patrol cars remained idling quietly. Naomi could not see the driver through the rain-streaked glass. For a moment, she considered reaching for her phone, but the tension in Keller's posture warned her against any sudden movement. Reeves suddenly tapped the rear window with his flashlight. Open the trunk. Naomi blinked. Why? Keller's jaw tightened slightly. Routine inspection. Officer, I do not consent to a search. Silence followed immediately. Even the rain suddenly sounded louder against the roof of the Honda. Keller stared at her without blinking. You refusing cooperation? Naomi swallowed slowly. Her voice remained calm, but softer now. I am asking if I am legally required to open my trunk. Reeves let out a quiet breath through his nose and exchanged another glance with Keller. The kind of glance that carried irritation more than procedure. Keller leaned closer toward the open window. Naomi could smell rainwater and coffee on his uniform. Step out of the vehicle, ma'am. Naomi's heartbeat quickened. Am I being detained? Step out of the vehicle. The command came firmer this time. Naomi closed her eyes for half a second before carefully unbuckling her seatbelt. She pushed the door open slowly and stepped into the cold drizzle. Rain immediately soaked into the shoulders of her navy blue scrubs. Her sneakers splashed lightly onto the pavement. The wind carried the distant hum of highway traffic somewhere beyond the neighborhood. Reeves moved toward the front of the car, while Keller remained directly beside her. Naomi folded her arms tightly against the cold, trying to preserve what little warmth remained in her body. A porch light flicked on across the street. Curtains shifted slightly in one of the houses nearby. Someone was watching now. Keller gestured toward the rear of the vehicle. Stand over there. Naomi obeyed quietly. Water dripped from her braids onto her shoulders while the patrol lights painted red and blue shadows across her tired face. Then, through the steady rain, the driver's side door of the dark SUV finally opened. The man who stepped out of the SUV did not move quickly. That was the first thing Naomi noticed. No panic, no raised voice, just calm, deliberate steps through the rain as the vehicle door closed softly behind him. He wore a dark charcoal overcoat over a white dress shirt with the collar slightly loosened, like someone who had been working late for hours. Water rolled from the edge of his shoulders as he approached the flashing patrol lights. Keller turned immediately toward the movement, one hand instinctively lifting slightly near his chest. Sir, stay back from the stop, he called out firmly. The man slowed, but did not stop completely. My wife called me, he replied evenly. His voice carried low through the rain, controlled and steady. Naomi felt her chest tighten with relief the moment she recognized him. Marcus Brooks. Even from across the wet pavement, she could recognize the calmness in his posture. It was the same calmness he carried through every difficult moment in their 12 years together. The kind that never needed to announce itself loudly. Marcus glanced toward Naomi first before looking at the officers. His eyes moved quickly over the scene. Her soaked scrubs, the open car door, the second cruiser, the flashlights. Naomi watched the smallest shift tighten across his jaw before it disappeared again beneath composure. You all right? He asked her softly. Naomi nodded once. I am okay. Keller stepped slightly forward. Sir, this is an active investigation. Marcus looked back at him calmly. Into what? Reeves crossed his arms loosely against the rain. Suspicious activity. Marcus glanced once toward Naomi's Honda, then toward the empty street surrounding them. Suspicious activity, he repeated quietly, almost to himself. Keller handed Naomi's registration back through the open window of the vehicle. Your wife matched a description. Marcus extended his hand politely. May I see identification? Keller frowned slightly. Excuse me. Your names and badge numbers, Marcus replied calmly. Since my wife has been detained roadside for nearly 20 minutes in the rain. Something in his tone shifted the air immediately. Not aggression. Authority. the kind that did not need volume to fill space. Reeves straightened slightly now, studying Marcus more carefully beneath the flashing lights. Marcus reached slowly inside his overcoat. Keller's posture instantly stiffened. "Hands where I can see them, sir." Marcus paused immediately and gave a small nod. "Relax, officer. I am reaching for identification." He moved carefully and removed a leather credential holder from inside his coat. Rain dripped steadily from his sleeve as he flipped it open beneath the patrol lights. Keller's expression changed before he could hide it. Reeves leaned closer instinctively. "Detective Marcus Brooks, Internal Affairs Division." The silver badge caught the red and blue reflections from the cruisers, gleaming sharply against the dark rain. Silence settled across the street, so suddenly Naomi could hear water trickling along the storm drain beside the curb. Keller blinked once and straightened his posture immediately. Reeves lowered his flashlight without realizing he had done it. Marcus closed the credential holder slowly and slid it back inside his coat. "Now," he said calmly, "I would like to understand why my wife was ordered out of her vehicle without probable cause." Neither officer answered immediately. Keller cleared his throat once before speaking. "We received a report from dispatch." Marcus nodded once. "What report?" Keller hesitated. "Suspicious vehicle." Marcus glanced toward Naomi's Honda again. A nurse driving home after a 14-hour hospital shift. Reeves shifted uncomfortably beside the rear bumper. Rain continued falling steadily around them, while porch lights glowed quietly from nearby homes. One curtain across the street moved again. Someone was still watching. Marcus folded his hands calmly in front of him. "Tell me exactly what criminal behavior justified escalating this stop." Keller opened his mouth slightly, but no words came out at first. Officer Keller finally shifted his weight and glanced briefly toward Reeves before answering. "The vehicle was reported moving slowly through the neighborhood multiple times tonight." Marcus listened without interrupting. Rain tapped steadily against the hood of the Honda between them. Naomi stood quietly beside the rear passenger door, arms folded tightly against the cold, watching the exchange unfold beneath the pulsing patrol lights. "Multiple times," Marcus repeated calmly. "My wife drove through this street once." Keller's jaw tightened slightly. "That is the information dispatch gave us." Marcus nodded once. "Then dispatch should have recorded the call." Reeves cleared his throat softly. "Look, detective, we were just checking things out." Marcus turned his attention toward him now. Checking things out does not explain ordering a citizen out into the rain after she declined consent to search her trunk. Reeves opened his mouth slightly, then closed it again. Naomi could see the tension building now, not loud or explosive, but heavy, like pressure gathering quietly beneath the surface. Marcus took one slow step toward the Honda and glanced through the open driver's side door. The stuffed giraffe still rested beside the folded pediatric scrubs in the back seat. A hospital meal container sat unopened near the console. Keller followed his gaze. "We had no way of knowing who she was." Marcus looked back at him calmly. "You knew exactly who she was." The words landed softly, but Keller's expression shifted immediately. Across the street, the front door of one of the homes opened slightly. An older white woman stepped onto the porch wearing a gray cardigan over pajamas, watching silently beneath the porch light. Marcus noticed her, but kept his focus on the officers. "You saw a tired black woman driving alone after midnight in a wealthy neighborhood," he continued evenly. "And somehow that became suspicious enough for 2 patrol units." Keller's face hardened defensively. "With all respect, detective, you are making assumptions." Marcus nodded faintly. "Then help me understand the facts." Keller hesitated again. Rainwater rolled slowly from the brim of his cap onto his shoulder. Her route raised concern. Marcus tilted his head slightly. "Concern of what crime?" No answer came immediately. Reeves looked down briefly toward the wet pavement. Naomi watched Marcus carefully. She knew that look in his eyes. He was not angry. That was the unsettling part. Marcus became quieter whenever disappointment replaced anger. "Did either of you observe reckless driving?" he asked. "No expired registration? No broken taillight? No signs of impairment?" Keller exhaled slowly. "No." Marcus let the silence linger after each answer. The flashing patrol lights reflected across the puddles gathering near the curb, while thunder rumbled faintly somewhere farther away now. Naomi felt rain soaking deeper into her sleeves, but she no longer noticed the cold as much as the stillness settling over the scene. Reeves finally spoke again, softer this time. She refused consent to search. Marcus nodded once. Which is her constitutional right. Reeves looked away. Marcus reached into his coat pocket and removed his phone calmly. I would like the incident number for this stop. Keller straightened slightly. Detective, there is no need to escalate this. Marcus looked directly at him. The moment my wife was treated like a criminal without evidence, this escalated. Naomi lowered her eyes briefly. The words hurt because they were true. She had felt it from the second the flashlight touched her face. Not procedure. Judgment. The older woman across the street slowly descended her porch steps now, umbrella in hand. She stopped near the sidewalk, watching quietly with concern written across her face. Marcus noticed her approach before looking back at Keller once more. Tell me honestly, he said softly. If my wife looked different tonight, would we still be standing here? Keller's lips parted slightly, but nothing came out. And for the first time since the stop began, the sound of the rain no longer covered the silence. The older woman stepped closer beneath her umbrella, stopping just short of the curb. Her silver hair curled softly against the damp night air, while her eyes moved between Naomi and the officers with visible discomfort. Everything all right over here? She asked carefully. Keller answered before anyone else could speak. Yes, ma'am. Routine traffic stop. The woman looked toward Naomi standing alone in soaked scrubs beneath the flashing lights. Something in her expression changed slightly. Routine, she repeated quietly, almost like she did not believe it herself. Marcus slipped his phone back into his coat pocket without breaking eye contact with Keller. I asked for the incident number. Keller finally reached for the small notepad clipped near his vest and read off the number stiffly. Marcus memorized it immediately. Naomi could tell by the stillness in his face. He never forgot details once his mind locked onto them. Reeves shifted awkwardly near the rear of the Honda and glanced toward the second cruiser. The confidence both officers carried earlier had faded now, replaced by something heavier. Not fear exactly. Awareness. Marcus stepped beside Naomi at last, close enough that she could feel warmth radiating faintly from his coat despite the rain. He looked down at her soaked sleeves and tired eyes. You should sit back inside the car, he said softly. Naomi shook her head once. I am okay. But she was exhausted. Her legs ached from standing all day at the hospital. Her head pulsed faintly behind her eyes. Even the cold rain felt heavier now that the adrenaline had begun wearing off. Across the street, another porch light flicked on. Curtains shifted in two separate windows. The neighborhood was watching now, though nobody spoke above the sound of rainfall and idling engines. Marcus turned back toward Keller calmly. Did either of you activate body cameras during this stop? Reeves answered first this time. Yes. Marcus nodded once. Good. Keller folded his arms tightly. Detective, nobody here intended disrespect. Marcus studied him for a long second before replying. Intent matters less than impact. The words hung quietly in the cold air. Naomi lowered her gaze briefly. She thought about all the times she had swallowed discomfort to avoid escalating situations exactly like this. The suspicious looks in expensive stores. The assumptions. The way people relaxed only after hearing her speak softly or seeing the hospital badge around her neck. Tonight had felt different because she was too tired to perform comfort for anyone. She had simply existed. And somehow that had been enough to become suspicious. Reeves suddenly rubbed the back of his neck and looked toward Naomi. Ma'am, if things came across wrong. His sentence faded unfinished. Naomi looked at him calmly. Water dripped steadily from the ends of her braids onto the pavement below. I was driving home from taking care of sick children, she said quietly. And somehow I ended up standing in the rain, proving I belong in my own neighborhood. Reeves looked away immediately. Even Keller's jaw tightened slightly after hearing it spoken aloud. The older woman near the sidewalk lowered her umbrella a little and shook her head under her breath. Marcus remained silent for a moment before speaking again. Do you know what the hardest part of this job is? He asked the officers calmly. Neither answered. Not danger. Not long hours. It is watching good authority become careless authority. Keller swallowed once. The flashing patrol lights reflected across Marcus's badge beneath his coat as he continued. Every unnecessary stop chips away at trust. Every assumption teaches people fear instead of safety. Rainwater slid down the side of the Honda in thin silver lines while thunder rolled softly farther away now, moving east across the city. Naomi finally wrapped her arms tighter around herself against the cold. Marcus noticed immediately and removed his coat without hesitation, placing it gently over her shoulders. The warmth of it nearly broke her composure right there beside the flashing lights. Keller watched quietly as Naomi pulled the coat closed around herself. Then, for the first time since the stop began, his voice lost its sharp edge completely. "Mrs. Brooks," he said quietly, "you are free to go." For a few seconds, nobody moved. The patrol lights continued spinning silently across the wet street, washing everything in slow pulses of red and blue while rain softened into a light drizzle overhead. Naomi stood there wrapped in Marcus's coat, the fabric still warm from his shoulders, and stared down at the pavement glistening beneath her shoes. "You are free to go." The words should have brought relief immediately, but instead they left behind something heavier. Exhaustion, the kind that settled deeper than tired muscles or aching feet. Marcus gently opened the passenger door of the Honda for her. Naomi hesitated before getting inside. Her eyes drifted once more toward Keller and Reeves standing beside their cruisers beneath the fading rain. Neither officer looked at her directly anymore. The confidence they carried earlier had dissolved into silence. Naomi lowered herself slowly into the passenger seat. The warmth inside the car fogged the edges of the windshield almost instantly. Her hands trembled faintly as she pulled Marcus's coat tighter around herself. Outside, Marcus remained standing beside the open door for another moment. "Go ahead and start the car," he told her softly. Naomi nodded weakly and reached across toward the ignition. The engine turned over with a tired hum. Warm air slowly pushed through the vents again. Across the street, the older woman finally spoke. "Young lady?" Naomi looked up through the open passenger window. The woman stepped a little closer beneath her umbrella, her face lined with quiet sadness. "I am sorry this happened to you." Naomi blinked once, caught off guard by the gentleness in the woman's voice. For a second, emotion tightened unexpectedly in her throat. "Thank you," she whispered. The woman gave a small nod before slowly returning toward her porch, disappearing back into the warm yellow light of her doorway. Marcus closed the passenger door softly and walked around toward the driver's side. Keller took a small step forward as if he wanted to say something, then stopped himself. Marcus paused beside him briefly before opening his own door. "Officer Keller." Keller straightened immediately. Marcus's voice stayed calm. "Tonight can either become a lesson or a habit. That choice is yours." Keller swallowed once and lowered his eyes briefly. "Understood, detective." Marcus nodded once, then finally got into the car. The moment the doors shut, the outside noise faded into muffled silence. Naomi leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes for a moment. She could still see the flashlight in her face, still hear the suspicion in Keller's voice asking if the car really belonged to her. Marcus rested both hands lightly on the steering wheel without pulling away yet. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Naomi let out a long breath she felt like she had been holding for 20 minutes. "I think so." Marcus looked over at her carefully. "You do not have to pretend with me." That nearly broke her composure again. Naomi stared out through the rain-speckled windshield. "I was just driving home," she said softly. "That is the part one cannot stop thinking about." Marcus did not answer immediately. Outside, one of the patrol cruisers finally switched off its flashing lights. Darkness returned slowly to the quiet neighborhood street. "Sometimes people only see what fear teaches them to see," Marcus said quietly. Naomi looked down at her hospital badge resting against her chest. Earlier that night, a little boy recovering from surgery had squeezed her hand before falling asleep and whispered, "You make the room feel safe." The memory hit her harder now than the stop itself. She spent every day trying to make people feel less afraid. Yet somehow, standing on this street tonight, she had been treated like fear itself. Marcus gently reached over and took her hand. His thumb brushed softly across her cold fingers. No speeches, no promises, just quiet understanding. The heater hummed softly inside the Honda while rainwater slid slowly down the windshield beneath the dim glow of the streetlights. And for the first time since the flashing lights appeared behind her car, Naomi finally allowed herself to breathe. The drive home was quiet except for the soft rhythm of windshield wipers brushing rain across the glass. Streetlights passed in slow golden streaks over the hood of the Honda while the city settled deeper into midnight silence around them. Naomi sat curled slightly beneath Marcus's coat, staring out the passenger window at blurred reflections sliding across wet sidewalks. Neither of them spoke much at first. Some moments did not need language immediately. They just needed space to settle. Marcus kept both hands steady on the wheel, his expression unreadable beneath the dim dashboard light. But Naomi knew him too well not to notice the tension still resting behind his calm exterior. He had spent years investigating complaints inside the department. Abuse of authority, corruption, officers who forgot the difference between protection and control. Tonight, for the first time, that world had touched his own home directly. As they turned onto their street, Naomi finally spoke. "You knew right away." Marcus glanced at her briefly. "About what?" "That it was not really about the car." Marcus exhaled softly through his nose before answering. "I knew the moment I saw you standing in the rain." Naomi looked down at her hands resting in her lap. Earlier she had tried so hard to stay composed, but now the exhaustion returned in waves. "Part of me kept wondering if maybe I was overreacting," she admitted quietly. "That is what happens after enough moments like this. You start questioning your own instincts before anyone else has to." Marcus tightened his grip slightly on the steering wheel. "Naomi." She looked up at him. "You were not imagining anything tonight." The certainty in his voice settled something inside her chest she had not realized was still shaking loose. The Honda pulled into the driveway of their small brick home a few minutes later. Rain had almost stopped completely now, leaving only faint drops falling from tree branches overhead. Warm porch light spilled softly across the front steps. Naomi stared at it for a second longer than usual. Home suddenly felt less ordinary tonight, more precious. Marcus turned off the engine, but neither moved right away. The silence inside the car felt gentle now instead of tense. Naomi leaned back against the seat and closed her eyes briefly. "I hate that you had to see that," she whispered. Marcus looked at her carefully. "I hate that you had to live it." Those words stayed between them quietly. Honest. Heavy. True. Inside the house, warmth wrapped around them immediately after the cold rain outside. Naomi slipped off her damp sneakers near the door while Marcus quietly disappeared into the kitchen. A few seconds later, the sound of a kettle filling broke the silence. Familiar. Normal. Grounding. Naomi walked slowly toward the living room and stopped near the hallway mirror. For a moment, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Tired eyes, damp braids, hospital scrubs wrinkled from a 14-hour shift, and roadside questioning beneath flashing lights. She touched the edge of Marcus's coat, still hanging over her shoulders. Then her phone buzzed softly inside her scrub pocket. Naomi pulled it out slowly. A notification from the hospital group chat appeared on the screen. One of the pediatric nurses had posted a picture of the little boy Naomi comforted earlier that evening. He was asleep in his hospital bed, holding the stuffed giraffe from her back seat. Beneath the picture, the message read, "He finally slept through the night. His mother says thank you." Naomi stared at the screen silently, while emotion tightened unexpectedly in her throat again. After everything tonight, that simple message felt almost overwhelming. Marcus returned from the kitchen, carrying 2 steaming mugs of tea. He stopped when he noticed the tears gathering quietly in Naomi's eyes. "What is it?" he asked softly. Naomi showed him the photo without speaking. Marcus looked at it for a long moment before nodding faintly. "That," he said quietly, "is who you really are. No traffic stop changes that." Naomi looked down at the sleeping child on her screen once more. Outside, rainwater dripped softly from the gutters into the darkness, while the last distant echo of sirens faded somewhere far across the sleeping city. The next morning arrived gray and quiet, the storm washed away but still lingering in the damp air outside the house. Naomi stood in the kitchen wearing fresh navy blue scrubs while soft sunlight filtered through the blinds in pale stripes across the counter. The kettle hummed gently behind her. For the first time in years, she hesitated before reaching for her car keys. Her fingers paused against the cold metal. Marcus noticed immediately from the dining table where he sat reviewing files from work. "You do not have to drive alone today," he said softly. Naomi gave a small smile without looking at him. "I cannot let last night turn into fear." Marcus studied her for a moment before nodding once. That was Naomi. Quiet strength. The kind people often overlooked because it never demanded attention. She picked up her coffee and headed toward the front door, but before she could open it, her phone buzzed sharply against the kitchen counter. Marcus glanced up as Naomi checked the screen. Her expression shifted slightly with surprise. "It is from an unknown number," she murmured. She answered cautiously, "Hello." For a second, only silence came through the line. Then a familiar voice spoke quietly. "Mrs. Brooks, this is Officer Keller." Naomi froze near the doorway. Marcus looked up immediately from the table. Naomi lowered the phone slightly before lifting it back to her ear. "Yes." Keller cleared his throat softly on the other end. He sounded completely different from the night before. No sharpness, no authority, just uncertainty. "I know this probably is not a call you wanted this morning," he said quietly, "but I needed to say something." Naomi leaned lightly against the wall beside the door while listening. Outside, rainwater still dripped slowly from the edge of the gutters beneath a pale, cloudy sky. "I reviewed the body camera footage after my shift," Keller continued. "And honestly, seeing it back made me uncomfortable." Naomi remained silent. Keller exhaled slowly. "You were cooperative from the start. Respectful. Calm. And I kept pushing anyway." Marcus watched Naomi carefully from across the room, but he did not interrupt. Keller's voice lowered further. "I think somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing people and started seeing possibilities. Threats. Assumptions. Last night made me realize how dangerous that becomes." Naomi closed her eyes briefly. Hearing the words did not erase what happened, but it shifted something unexpectedly inside her chest. Not victory, not revenge, just acknowledgement. Real acknowledgement. "Mrs. Brooks," Keller said softly, "I am sorry." Silence settled gently after the apology. Naomi looked down at the coffee mug warming her hands. She remembered the flashlight against her face, the suspicion in his voice, the humiliation of standing soaked beneath flashing lights while strangers watched from their windows. But she also remembered Marcus's words in the car. "Tonight can either become a lesson or a habit. That choice is yours." Naomi finally spoke quietly. "Officer Keller?" "Yes, ma'am. I do not need perfection from people." Her voice remained soft, but steady. "I just need them to remember humanity before judgment." The line stayed silent for a moment. Then Keller answered almost in a whisper, "I will remember that." Naomi nodded faintly, even though he could not see her. "Take care of yourself, officer." "You too, Mrs. Brooks." The call ended softly. Naomi lowered the phone slowly and stared at the screen for another second before locking it. Marcus stood from the table and walked toward her. "You okay?" Naomi nodded once. "I think he meant it." Marcus looked at her carefully. "And what do you think about that?" Naomi glanced out through the window toward her parked Honda, sitting quietly beneath the damp morning sky. "I think people can do better once they finally see clearly." Marcus smiled faintly at that. Not because the world had suddenly changed overnight, but because after everything that happened, Naomi still chose hope over bitterness. And somehow, that required more strength than anger ever could. 3 weeks later, the rain had long disappeared from Brookline Heights, replaced by clear autumn skies and cool evening air that carried the scent of pine and chimney smoke through the neighborhood streets. Naomi parked outside Mercy General just before sunrise, the pale orange glow of morning stretching slowly across the city skyline in the distance. The hospital lobby buzzed quietly with nurses changing shifts, rolling carts squeaking across polished floors, and tired families clutching paper coffee cups beneath fluorescent lights. Life moving forward again. Naomi adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder and stepped inside. As she crossed the pediatric wing, a small voice suddenly called out behind her. "Miss Naomi." She turned just in time to see the little boy from weeks earlier running carefully down the hallway, clutching the stuffed giraffe against his chest. His mother hurried behind him, smiling apologetically. "Slow down, Tyler." But the boy ignored her completely. He wrapped his arms tightly around Naomi's waist. "I slept all night again," he announced proudly. Naomi laughed softly for the first time that morning and crouched down beside him. "That is amazing." Tyler held up the giraffe. "I named him Marcus." Naomi blinked once in surprise before smiling wider. "Did you now?" The boy nodded seriously. "Because he protects people." Naomi looked up and saw Marcus himself standing farther down the hallway near the nurse's station, still wearing his dark coat from outside. He had stopped by before work to bring her breakfast like he sometimes did after difficult nights. He lifted one eyebrow playfully when he noticed the giraffe's new name. Naomi shook her head softly with a smile. Tyler's mother stepped closer, then hesitated slightly. "Miss Brooks," she said quietly, "I saw something online last week." Naomi's smile faded just a little. Marcus looked over from the hallway immediately. The woman quickly continued. Somebody uploaded part of the traffic stop from a security camera across the street. Naomi felt her stomach tighten faintly. Oh, the woman's eyes softened. I just wanted to say, the way you handled yourself mattered. People noticed. Naomi lowered her eyes briefly. She had not watched the footage herself. Marcus had told her only enough to explain why the department suddenly opened a procedural review into the stop. According to him, most comments online focused less on confrontation and more on the way she stayed calm while being treated unfairly. The video spread quietly through the city over the past 2 weeks. Nurses at the hospital had recognized her. So had strangers at the grocery store. Not because she became famous, but because dignity under pressure leaves an impression people remember. Tyler tugged gently on her sleeve. My mom says heroes are the people who stay kind when other people are not. Naomi looked back at him slowly. For a second, she could not speak. The hallway around her softened into a blur of early morning light, distant intercom announcements, and quiet footsteps passing across polished tile floors. Finally, she reached up and brushed a hand gently across Tyler's curls. Your mom sounds very smart. The boy grinned proudly. Marcus walked over then, handing Naomi a warm paper cup of coffee. Their fingers touched briefly in the exchange. Familiar. Steady. Safe. Tyler looked between them and smiled. That is him. Naomi laughed quietly. That is him. Marcus nodded solemnly toward the stuffed giraffe. I am honored. Tyler's mother smiled before guiding him gently back toward his room. Naomi watched them disappear down the hallway together. Then she looked over at Marcus beside her. Morning sunlight streamed through the hospital windows now, reflecting softly against his badge clipped near his belt beneath the open coat. Neither of them spoke for a moment. They did not need to. Around them, doctors hurried to morning rounds. Nurses checked charts. Coffee machines hissed softly in distant break rooms. And somewhere down the hall a child laughed brightly enough to echo. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary life. But Naomi understood something now she had not fully understood before that rainy night beneath flashing lights. Strength was not loud. It was not humiliation returned with humiliation. Sometimes strength was simply refusing to let the world harden the gentle parts of you. Marcus reached for her hand quietly as they stood together in the warm hospital light. And this time, when Naomi breathed in deeply, there was no fear left in it at all.